Right now, there's probably a little container of it sitting in your kitchen. You don't think twice about it. You sprinkle it on your food, maybe toss some in boiling water, and move on with your day. But here's the thing, for most of human history, that little white crystal you're ignoring was worth more than gold. People fought wars over it. Empires rose and fell because of it. Attacks on it helped spark one of the biggest revolutions in history, and a walk to go get some, just a walk, helped bring down British rule in India. So today we're talking about salt. Not the boring version. The real story, the one where this common seasoning shaped civilization itself. Let's get into it. Okay, so first, why did anyone care this much about salt in the first place? It seems so basic now. Here's the answer. Before refrigeration existed, and we're talking thousands and thousands of years before that, salt was the single best way humans had to keep food from rotting. Meat, fish, vegetables, pack them in salt, and suddenly food that would spoil in days could last for months, sometimes years. Think about what that actually means for a second. If you're a fisherman or a farmer, or an army trying to feed thousands of soldiers on a march, salt is the difference between eating next winter or starving. It's the difference between a fishing town surviving a bad season or collapsing entirely. That's not a luxury. That's survival technology. And because everybody needed it, rich, poor, every culture, every continent, salt became something rare in economics. A good that's both absolutely essential and often hard to get your hands on. When you combine everyone needs this with not everyone has access to it, you get power, real power. Whoever controlled the salt controlled something close to life itself. The Egyptians understood salt's power better than almost anyone in the ancient world. They used it for food preservation, sure, but they took it further. Salt was a key part of the mummification process. Natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture harvested from dry lake beds, was used to dry out bodies before wrapping them, pulling the moisture out and stopping decay in its tracks. Without it, the elaborate afterlife rituals the Egyptians built their whole culture around simply wouldn't have worked. Salt shows up in their trade records too. It moved along the Nile, got bartered for goods, and became tied up in religious offerings. When something is valuable enough to bury with the dead and important enough to regulate through trade, it's not just seasoning. It's infrastructure. Let's jump to Rome, because this is where one of the coolest linguistic facts in history comes from. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid an allowance specifically to buy salt. This allowance was called a salarium. And yes, that's exactly where our word salary comes from. Every time you talk about your paycheck, you're technically referencing an ancient salt allowance. Kind of wild when you think about it. Rome didn't just pay for salt, though. They built entire roads around it. One of their major highways, the Via Salaria, literally translates to Salt Road. It ran from the Adriatic coast toward Rome, and its whole purpose was moving salt inland to the capital and beyond. An empire that built actual physical infrastructure, roads that still partially exist today just to move salt around. That's how central it was to daily Roman life. And it wasn't only about food preservation for Rome. Salt was used in religious sacrifices, in medicine, even in soldiers' rations directly. It touched nearly every part of society. Now, where did all this salt actually come from? There were a few main ways to get it, and one of the most dramatic is rock salt mining. Millions of years ago, ancient seas evaporated in certain regions, leaving behind massive underground deposits of solid salt. Miners figured out how to tunnel into these deposits and carve the salt right out of the earth. The most famous example still standing today is the Wieliczka salt mine in Poland, which has been in operation since the 13th century. We're talking hundreds of years of continuous mining. Over time, miners didn't just extract the salt. They carved chapels, statues, and entire chambers out of the salt walls themselves. Some of it so detailed it looks like stone carving rather than something made of seasoning. It became a small underground world, built entirely around this one resource. Mining salt wasn't glamorous work, though. It was dangerous, physically brutal, and often relied on forced or underpaid labor across different cultures and time periods. The value of the product didn't always translate into decent treatment for the people extracting it. A pattern that, honestly, shows up again and again throughout this whole story. Mining wasn't the only method, though. In coastal regions, people use something much simpler: the sun. Solar evaporation involves flooding shallow pools with seawater and just letting nature do the work. The sun and wind evaporate the water over time, leaving behind crystallized salt that workers then rake up and collect. You can still see these salt pans today in places around the Mediterranean, and honestly, they look almost like art from above, grids of shallow water reflecting the sky. In places without the right climate for that, think inland regions or areas without strong, consistent sun, people boil brine instead. They take naturally salty water, often from underground springs, and boil it down over fire until only the salt crystals remained. This was slower and more labor-intensive, but it worked anywhere there was salty water and fuel to burn. Different geography, different techniques, same goal: pull this essential mineral out of the earth or the sea by any means necessary. Now let's talk about China, because this is where salt turns into something closer to an entire government revenue system. Chinese authorities recognized early on, we're talking over 2,000 years ago, that if they controlled salt production and distribution, they controlled a guaranteed stream of income. Since everyone needed it, taxing or monopolizing salt meant a steady, dependable source of state revenue that didn't rely on unpredictable harvests or trade. This wasn't a minor side project either. Revenue from salt monopolies helped fund some of the most massive infrastructure projects in Chinese history, including, by some accounts, portions of the Great Wall itself. Picture that for a second. One of the most iconic structures ever built by human hands, partly financed by taxing table salt. The government also used salt policy as a tool of control, more broadly regulating who could produce it, who could sell it, and at what price. Smuggling illegal salt became its own dangerous, sometimes lucrative business, with black markets popping up specifically to get around state control. When a government builds an entire enforcement system just to protect its grip on one product, that tells you everything about how valuable it really was. Here's one of the wildest facts in this whole story. In parts of West Africa, salt was once traded for its exact weight in gold. Caravans crossed the Sahara Desert, one of the harshest environments on Earth, carrying massive slabs of salt mined from deposits deep in the desert interior. They'd travel for weeks, sometimes months, through brutal heat and shifting sand, just to reach trading cities in West Africa where salt was scarce but gold was abundant. And because the desert regions had salt but not gold, while West African kingdoms had gold but limited salt access, the trade made perfect sense on both sides. Cities like Timbuktu became legendary trading hubs partly because of this exchange, growing wealthy and influential as a direct result of sitting at the crossroads of these two valuable goods. It's a striking reminder that value is relative. In one place, salt is everywhere and gold is rare. Cross a desert, and suddenly it flips entirely. That difference alone built trade empires. Let's talk about Venice, because their entire rise to power has salt written all over it. Venice didn't have much in the way of natural resources, no fertile farmland, no major mineral deposits. What it did have was a strategic location and lagoons perfect for salt production through evaporation. Early on, Venetian merchants realized they could produce salt cheaply and then control its trade and distribution across the wider Mediterranean region. Over time, this evolved into something bigger. Venice used its salt trade as leverage to build broader commercial networks, expand its shipping power, and eventually dominate trade routes that had nothing to do with salt at all: spices, silk, textiles. Salt was the entry point. It got the ball rolling and gave Venice the capital and connections it needed to become one of the most powerful trading republics in European history. It's a pretty clean example of how controlling one essential resource can snowball into controlling an entire regional economy. Across medieval Europe more broadly, entire trade networks formed specifically to move salt from production centers to the places that needed it. Inland towns without coastal access or salt mines depended entirely on these trade routes, and the towns positioned along them often flourished simply because of their location. Toll roads, river routes, and overland paths developed specifically around salt transport, and taxing that movement became a reliable source of income for local rulers and merchants along the way. Salt merchants themselves became influential figures in many regions. Not quite nobility, but wealthy and politically connected because they controlled something everybody needed and nobody could easily produce on their own. Entire local economies were built around servicing these salt routes. Inns for traveling merchants, toll stations, storage warehouses. A whole ecosystem grew up around moving this one mineral from point A to point B. Now here's where things get politically explosive. In France, there was a salt tax called the gabelle, and it became one of the most hated taxes in the country's history. The gabelle wasn't just a flat tax. It was applied unevenly across different regions of France, and in many areas, people were legally required to buy a minimum amount of salt from state-controlled sources whether they needed it or not. Enforcement was strict, and penalties for evading the tax or smuggling untaxed salt could be severe. Over time, resentment toward the gabelle built up alongside broader frustrations about inequality, poverty, and an aristocracy that seemed increasingly disconnected from the struggles of everyday people. By the time the French Revolution broke out in the late 1700s, the salt tax had become a genuine symbol of everything people saw as unfair about the old system. A government taxing something as basic as survival while nobility lived in comfort. It wasn't the only cause of the revolution, not even close. But it's a really telling detail that a tax on salt, something so ordinary, became such a flashpoint. It shows just how deeply this one resource was tangled up in daily life and in people's sense of basic fairness. Let's move to colonial India, because this is where salt policy collides directly with independence movements. Under British colonial rule, the production and sale of salt in India became heavily regulated and taxed. The British government essentially monopolized salt, requiring Indians to buy it from official channels even though salt could easily be produced locally along India's massive coastline, simply by evaporating seawater. This created a strange, almost absurd situation. A country surrounded by ocean, with access to unlimited salt, was legally barred from making its own without paying a tax to a foreign government. For a resource this basic and this necessary, that kind of control landed as deeply personal and deeply unjust to a lot of people. Not just an economic policy, but a daily reminder of who held power over their lives. That frustration didn't stay quiet forever. And that brings us to one of the most famous moments in this entire story. In 1930, Mahatma Gandhi decided to protest British salt policy in about the simplest, most powerful way imaginable. He walked to the sea to make salt himself. Gandhi and a growing group of followers set out on a roughly 240-mile walk from his ashram to the coastal town of Dandi. As they walked, more and more people joined in, until the march had become a massive, highly visible act of peaceful defiance. When they finally reached the coast, Gandhi picked up a lump of natural salt from the shore, breaking British law simply by making salt without paying the tax. It sounds almost too simple to matter. A guy walking to the ocean and picking up some salt. But that was exactly the point. It was an act anyone could understand and anyone could replicate, all across the country. People everywhere began making their own illegal salt in response, turning a single protest into a nationwide movement of civil disobedience. The Salt March didn't end British rule immediately, but it became one of the defining moments of India's independence movement. Proof that a fight over something as basic as salt could become a fight over dignity, self-rule, and freedom itself. So how did we get from wars fought over salt to sitting forgotten in your kitchen cabinet? The answer is industrialization. As mining techniques, transportation, and evaporation processes became mechanized and far more efficient, the cost of producing salt dropped dramatically. What used to require dangerous mining expeditions or slow evaporation ponds could now be done at massive scale with machinery, and shipped anywhere in the world quickly and cheaply. Almost overnight, in historical terms, salt went from being one of the most valuable commodities on Earth to being one of the cheapest. The scarcity that had driven wars, taxes, and trade empires simply disappeared. It's a strange kind of ending for something that shaped so much of human history. Not a dramatic collapse, just abundance making it ordinary. So here's where we land. That little shaker on your table carries thousands of years of history inside it. Soldiers getting paid in it, empires taxing it, deserts being crossed for it, revolutions partly fueled by resentment over it, and a barefoot walk to the sea that helped push an empire toward its end. Salt didn't change because it got more complicated. It changed because we figured out how to make it abundant. And that's honestly a pattern worth noticing everywhere. How many things we consider ordinary today were once worth fighting wars over, simply because they used to be rare. Next time you reach for the salt shaker, it might be worth a second look. There's a lot more sitting on your table than just seasoning. What topic do you want us to cover next? Do tell us in the comment section and we will look into that. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.